Hello, my name is Alfie Moore and I'm a professional comedian, although I used to be a professional police officer. Well, when you're a comedian, you get interviewed quite a lot. Everybody always asks the same questions. The questions are like, they ask me, what do your colleagues think about you doing comedy, and what do the bosses think about you doing comedy? So they always tend to be very samey, and this is an opportunity for me to do something a little bit more interesting and a bit deeper. It was a pretty natural process because I think when you're a cop, you've got communication skills, you're used to dealing with pressurised situations. If you walk on stage as a comedian, you've got a room full of strangers. And that first minute, 2 minutes is crucial to make a connection with that audience. If you don't make a connection with your audience as a comedian, then you are grafting all the time. And you really struggle. That instant connection is important. Well, as a cop, you're always blue light into places, running to houses where there's been a disturbance, and you're faced with strangers in a highly pressurised situation, and the first thing you want to do, if you don't want to get stabbed, is make a connection very quickly. Same thing, nearly identical. You need to find a way to connect with those people, to think, well, he's all right. I think we're going to be all right here. I can communicate with this guy. Exactly the same thing. So for that reason, once I started doing comedy, it seemed to happen very quickly because I didn't know, but I'd already got that skill to some degree of making that early connection. You can't wear protective equipment on stage. That's a little bit, unfortunately, you need it sometimes. And you do need a USP. Of course you do. There's so many comedians, some very, very funny, but struggling for something to be unique about. You know, all the young people are talking about school and mum and dad and girlfriends, you know, and they must sit there thinking, what else can I talk about? So it's easier if you're older to have the life experience. But I never mentioned policing to start with when I did stand-up. And then I actually did a gig with Rod Gilbert above a pub in an Indian restaurant in Leicester. So it was before he broke. There was about 30 people in the room, and I was the open spot in the middle, and he was the closer at the end. And we had a chat. He had a fag on the balcony, and I told him, he asked me about myself. I said, well, I'm at work tomorrow. He said, what do you do? I said, I'm a copper. He said, well, you never mentioned it. I said, oh no, I wouldn't tell the audience. He said, really? He said, you need to talk about this stuff. So the next gig, I just mentioned policing, and people sat up, and I thought, that's interesting. People, you know, and it's if you don't have to be as funny because it's interesting, that's helpful, isn't it, for somebody in my line of work. So my brand really has become the comedy cop because it's not been done before. So I'm very fortunate that I sort of stumbled into a unique selling point, really. But I think that's required. All the memorable comedians that come up now need to be different somehow. My father was a gambler, a big gambler, Big Alf, and I won't use the word compulsive, it feels a little bit disrespectful, but he liked to do it quite a lot. And my mother was an alcoholic, and my brother Steve was a little bit of a psycho in his younger days. So it was colourful and it was chaotic, but all I can remember is the laughter. That's all I can remember. It was a really, really happy childhood. A little bit unusual, I guess, but that's all I can remember, the fun times we had. My father, Big Alf, was a very larger-than-life, colourful character. Everybody loved him, everybody knew Big Alf, and he was a big influence on my life. I've dabbled with gambling with mixed results. And I've had a little go at alcoholism, but I didn't really take to it, really. I took a show to the Edinburgh Festival a few years ago called Viva Alf's Vegas, and it was about my dad. And it was a typical Edinburgh dead dad show in a way. Everybody takes a dead dad show to Edinburgh at some time, and God bless him, no longer with us, my dad. But I also talked about my upbringing and his gambling, and how I was a compulsive gambler from a very early age. So It's strange that I never became an alcoholic after my mum, but I took after my dad. And I took a special guest to Edinburgh when I did the show. I've got him here. This is Sooty, but his stage name in Edinburgh was Mr. Timothy. And the story is with Mr. Timothy, I guess when I first realised I had a problem, I in my bedroom, I had a game of brag, 3-card brag with some friends for coppers, pennies, bits of money, and I ran out of money, but I got a good hand. And I ended up having to put in Sooty's eyes in the pot, and there you go, look, these are just temporary eyes. When we went to Edinburgh, we got him a pair of sunglasses, so... But yeah, so at 10-year-old, I lost my beloved, and this is my first teddy bear. He's older than I am, so he's at 10 years old. I lost my teddy bear's eyes. The show was about my upbringing. The show was about the influence of my parents, particularly my dad, and also about my concerns about gambling, because this is one of my soapbox things: gambling. About us as a society. I think we're missing a trick. Drugs are illegal. We try and limit the use of cigarettes. We're talking about plain packaging. We're talking about putting them higher up the shelf. I mean, you can't see the cigarette packets anyway because they're hidden behind a mountain of scratch cards. But because we promote gambling. So drugs are bad, drugs are illegal, smoking's bad, smoking's illegal. But gambling is fine. So we push it, we advertise it. We advertise it on daytime TV, in the middle of children's TV programmes. Up until recently we did that. Only just so we're starting to limit it now. Free advertising, if you pick up a newspaper, there'll be sponsorship, there'll be advertisements. We'll be giving free bets away. We won't go to the schoolyard and give free heroin away or free drugs away. We won't give free cigarettes to school kids, but we let them have access to free bets, and we let them see that. And the reason is money, because the government makes a great deal of tax revenue on gambling profits. And so I don't like where we're going with that. It's more prevalent, it's a big concern, and the deregulation of gambling is really a poor reflection of our society, I think. Blue. That's it. I thought I'd throw an easy one in. It's much harder than it looks. It's making your own questions up block, isn't it? Which is one of the questions I said that everybody asks me, and I found myself asking myself. What do my colleagues think? Well, who cares? No, they've been very supportive. My police colleagues have, in the main, been supportive. Not all of them, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. There is that interesting dynamic, and I don't know how much of that is a policey thing and how much of that is a Scunthorpe thing. Where, I mean, I love Scunthorpe. I got posted here, stayed here ever since. It's been a very good place for me. But I think there's different mentalities in different areas. John Bishop, who was a club comedian. I remember when I first started doing this, I was doing gigs with John Bishop with 40 people in a pub. And he's done extremely well, as we know. A funny guy. From Liverpool, he built a big following, actually within Liverpool, and that grew and grew throughout the region, and he became a national success. That sort of thing happens in Liverpool, where they grow a following and they support each other. In a place like Scunthorpe, not so much. No disrespect, but when I tour about, I've had better numbers and more supportive audience in other places. You can come to your hometown. You're never a prophet in your own town. Is that the expression? In your own country. Sometimes when I brought the early shows to Scunthorpe, although some people were very supportive, I noticed that other people, arms folded, make me laugh then. Go on. Who do you think you are? Trying to get out. Again, this is one of the questions that I get asked a lot that I've ended up writing down. Very supportive in the main. The police are desperate to make a connection with the public. For years, we've always been considered a bit up ourselves and a bit secretive. And after recent events, there's all sorts of things in the papers about Hillsborough and about Orgreave and Stephen Lawrence and all the rest of it. We are desperate to be seen to be open and transparent. We've modernised a lot. We want people to see that we're all right. And I think comedy is a very valuable form of engagement with the public. So I get booked quite a lot by the bosses. They laugh in different places, police audiences to a civilian audience, but they still get it, and they support me. I did a big police do in London last week with some very senior officers, and it was a Met Police, so it was a cash in hand job, and and a very, very senior Met officer actually stood. You've got to be careful, of course. You've got to be careful what you say, because a very senior Met officer actually stood up, walked out. He was offended after some of my jokes had been explained to him. He didn't like it, so you've got to be careful. But yeah, they're very, very supportive. It was at my wedding 13 years ago, my second marriage. I lost my first wife through gambling, not over the card table as I did Sooty's eyes, not literally, but I got married very young, and although a very happy marriage and the right person for me at that time, we drifted apart in our 30s, and I ended up getting married a second time 13 years ago. I gave the groom's speech. I didn't think anything to it. I was used to talking a little bit. I've got no sort of performance or writing background, but obviously at work as a police officer, I'd give briefings sometimes as a police sergeant to staff at work. So I was able to talk, but that's all really. I gave this groom speech, and somebody came up to me and said, "That is the funniest wedding speech I've ever heard." And I thought, oh, that's nice, but they're just being nice. And then two other people independently came up and said exactly the same thing. And I think then a little seed was planted where I thought, that's an interesting thing to say, that I can deliver a funny speech. And so a few years later, an opportunity came up where I entered a stand-up comedy competition, just got up with a few beers in me and had a go, and people laughed, and it seemed to take to it. So that was interesting and planted the seed, really. And now my wife, she manages my affairs, she does the corporate booking, she's produces the tour show, and she's the brains of the outfit, really, and she knows what I do better than anybody, and the correct audience for that. I think comedy is all about finding your audience. If you get lots of funny people, but you put them in the wrong rooms, that's not going to work out. That's not going to work out well. She understands the brand, she understands my audience. I love taking shows to Edinburgh. I think Edinburgh is a fabulous city, especially during the Edinburgh Festival. It comes to life, it's 24/7, colourful, performances in every bar, every street corner, characters. Whatever rides past on a bicycle, whether it's naked or a 20-foot clown, nobody flinches because it's Edinburgh, so you can be as weird as you like for that month. Fabulous place. My initial experience of Edinburgh was, I didn't know what to expect. And normally people go into comedy these days, they pick it up at college, university, and Edinburgh is full of young people with performance backgrounds. I'm a little bit different. I first went to Edinburgh well into my 40s, and it's a very arty place during the festival, and it's got a very arty audience. And I think there's a certain expectancy, particularly from reviewers who, I've lost count of them how many times they mention the word northern when they review my comedy show. Why? Alfie Moore, northern comedian, northern. Why? I've never seen anybody mention southern or southwestern but northern. So I think there's a little bit, and it's not just me with my northern chip, I think there's a little bit of, if a 40-odd-year-old chubby copper turned up with a face for radio, there's a certain expectancy. From Scunthorpe, there's a certain expectancy you're going to be a certain way. So there's a certain expectancy you're going to be a bit working men's club, Bernard Manning-esque. And you know, it's nice to surprise people. I'm not like that at all. But I remember one particular review, and I can't remember the publication, but this was word for word. It said, he has a way with words far superior to many of his northern peers. was actually the review. And I thought, well, that's fabulous. What does it mean? Why? but there you go. So, but once you reach out to that Edinburgh audience, fabulous. And once they accept you, but I do think there's a little bit of bias expectancy. If you're a northern middle-aged guy turning up, they're expecting something else. I'm very pro-police, certainly at the grassroots level, because I know how difficult the job is. I am concerned. I am deeply concerned about the way the police is going. We've had 20,000 less cops than we had about 7 or 8 years ago. The budget is being slashed all the time and continues to be slashed. I thought this would be a political fighting ground. The last 2 elections, policing, never mentioned. Only really in the last sort of 6-12 months have people started to talk about it, have started to notice. I took the show up to Edinburgh a few years ago and I said, do you know this is starting to happen? Do you know about this mass civilianisation programme? Do you know bobbies are being cut? Do you know budgets are being cut? And people had no idea. We managed to bring it in secretly. The trouble is with police, it's one of those organisations that you only need when you need them. So you don't notice until you actually, some years down the line, become a victim of crime and ring us and find out we're not coming. Then you've not really noticed any changes. Or if it gets particularly bad in your area, then you don't really notice. As long as crime doesn't happen to you, then you didn't know what was happening. So I think some of the bosses have been to blame in the past. I think they've brought in a lot of this cost-cutting programmes while they were in a position to stand up. So the Home Office can win votes, the politicians can win votes by bringing in policies, and the top layer historically have said, fine, yeah, give us a policy. And it's only when it's filtered down to somebody at inspector or sergeant level, somebody with a bit of practical common sense, will they look at that policy and say, no, this is madness, this is not doable. But nobody's been saying it higher up. You get a lot of people that have left the police in very powerful positions that have never made a stand until their last wage check's in the bank, and then they'll say, oh, policing's in trouble. But it's only in the last year. Once again, it's nice to see in the last year, chief constables and people in position of power within the police are actually starting to stand up and say, no, we're actually in trouble now. Even our inspector at Emergencies Inspector of Constabulary recently said, and they're the ones really working for the Home Office, to inspectors only recently, so they're very establishment. But recently they've said, these people can't cope. You know, so that's nice that the word is getting out there. And, you know, the cynics, of which I'm obviously not, the cynics would say that it's that the police service is being run down, and when it starts to fail, which is beginning to happen, then it will be sold off and it'll end up Serco and Group 4 and split between them for profit. That is a massive concern, and that is something that really the public need to decide what sort of police force they want and make that happen, because if not, it will continue to dwindle away. Policing was a career for life. Now the model has changed. The model is now reflective of the military, where we'll sign them up for 5 years, maybe 7 years, and we'll send them out, burn them out, break their hearts, and when they're broken, we'll get a new batch. That is the future, and they're quite open about this. That's the plan, you know. Copy the military, 5-year contracts, bring them in young and naive, break them, get the next batch. I don't think that's really what the public want. BBC Radio 4, love it. They still go talent hunting the old-fashioned way. They hire a flat in Edinburgh for the festival, for the month-long festival every year, and they'll send a couple of 3 executive producers up every week to have a few glasses of wine and see as many interesting shows as possible. That's what happened to me. This lady said to me, I'm Alison Vernon Smith, I'm a producer at Radio 4, like your show, have you got any ideas for radio? And I said, oh yeah, I've got loads. I'd never listened to Radio 4 in my life. I said, oh yeah, I've got loads. So I went to London, I had some meetings, wrote some stuff, and that was the struggling circuit I've been talking about. The timing was perfect for me. I was very fortunate because that meant when I hit Radio 4, which has got a big listening audience, that enabled me to tour my own shows, and I wasn't reliant on the circuit anymore. It also meant I could do decent paid corporate gigs and be more creative with such things as Edinburgh, which tend to cost money at my level. There are marketing costs. I can now do corporate gigs, and that'll pay for my Edinburgh. So, massive fan of BBC Radio 4. I will continue to be a supportive spokesperson for the police in my own way, and I'll be the first to take the mickey out of them if they come out with some weird policy, or the establishment or the centre try and hijack them, which they do quite a bit. I'll be the first to speak out. I think that comedy is a very, very powerful. It's a form of entertainment. We know it is, but I think there's a lot more to comedy. If people are laughing, they're listening, and so I think within education, reaching hard to reach groups, helping people, mental health, offenders. I think there's a massive future for using comedy to engage with people, and that's what I intend to do.